On today's episode of Let's Talk Drones, we are making history on this channel. For this channel, not really history in general, but for this channel, this is a first. See, over the last month or so, I've had an unreleased product in my hands with the opportunity to test, experiment, and do whatever I want with it before its eventual release. Today is that day, October 8th, that GEPRC announces the release of the TAKER F745 BT 8-bit 60 amp stack, and I'm here to share it with you. So without further ado, let's talk drones. What's up? It's Chris, the Drone Geek, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Drones. Let's Talk Drones is brought to you by The Droning Company. Check them out online at thedroningcompany.com across all major social media platforms, and make sure you get subscribed to their YouTube channel as well. Lots of great content on their YouTube channel, as well as content from myself, Sam Karp, Tim Brazel, and all of the familiar faces you know and love from The Droning Company. Check them out online, thedroningcompany.com, and across all major social media platforms. So full disclosure, I really didn't do that good of a job of keeping this product secret before its release. Because if you recall, just a few videos ago, I shared with you some of the products coming down the pipeline that I would be reviewing, and I mentioned the TAKER F745 stack. I didn't get into great detail about what this stack is capable of or what comes with the stack, but I did sort of pull the curtain back. And so to the fine folks over at GEPRC, I'm sorry. I'm new to this whole like keep it hush hush thing. So I'll do better in the future. Just know that it was totally unintentional. I am very, very sorry. But why focus on the negative when we can focus on the positive, right? And the positive is that today, October 8th, the TAKER F745 BT 8-bit 60 amp stack officially released from GEPRC. You can go to GEPRC.com and purchase this stack right now for the first time ever. Really exciting stuff out of GEPRC. I want to thank those folks for sending this product over to me to take a look at it, review it, and integrate it into one of my FPV platforms. Now, we had a lot of plans when it came to this stack. I'm going to call it the TAKER F745 from now on. That's a whole mouthful. I'm not just going to keep saying it over and over and over again. The TAKER F745 stack was originally supposed to go into the GEPRC racer frame. That is until I realized just how tight of a fit that was going to be, and the fact that I'd need to purchase an analog kit for my goggles and then wire in, and it was wild. It was a wild concept to do in like less than a month's time. So I thought, you know what? No, we're gonna backpedal on that idea. We'll come back to the racer frame. We will build a racing drone with the racer frame for sure. That is coming down the pipeline. But what we're gonna do with this one is we're gonna build a Cinewhoop drone. Now, my Cinelog 35 from GEPRC served me really well over a few years, but unfortunately it just sort of crapped out. It just doesn't work. The electronics, the components to it collected too much dust. So instead, what I'm gonna do is salvage the parts that I can out of it. But in the meantime, I need a Cinewhoop drone. So I went and I purchased a bunch of parts for a Cinewhoop drone with the idea in mind that the TAKER F745 was coming to me, and that was going to be the heart and the mind of this drone. Now, disclaimer, this is not a how to build a Cinewhoop drone video. We'll be doing one of those in the future, but this is not it. I want to focus on the stack. So we're going to be looking at how to integrate the stack into a build. We won't be talking about how you mount the motors. We won't be talking about the VTX. We won't be talking about the RX in any level of detail that matters. We're really only going to be looking at how do we mount the flight controller in ESC, how do we integrate it with the rest of our peripherals on the drone, and how do we get it running. That's what today's video is about. The next few videos in this series are going to be looking at the performance, the tuning, how do we get this thing to fly exactly the way we want it to fly. So bear with me. This is the first time I've ever taken a drone from a box of parts and put it together in front of the camera for any amount of time. So please bear with me as we get into this. And a reminder, again, this is not a how to build this drone. This is a how do we integrate the TAKER F745 stack into this build that I've come up with. Enough talking. Let's go over to the soldering station let's get started. As I said in the intro of this video, this is not an FPV drone build out series. This is a series reviewing the Taker F745 stack that you see here, semi-mounted to this drone frame. I'll talk about why it's semi-mounted in just a few moments. If you would like to take a shot at building this drone yourself, or if you're just interested in the parts that I used and you want to incorporate just a few of them in a build that you're planning, you can go ahead and find links down in the description of this video. I do have a few affiliate links mixed in there. I will mark those links with the word affiliate in parentheses next to those links so that you're very, very clear on which parts I'm getting kickbacks on and which parts I am not. So now that we've got that out of the way, you'll see here I've got my frame, I've got my motors mounted to my frame, got a bunch of out of control motor wires here, and I've got our Taker F745 stack. We're gonna go ahead and remove the flight controller from the frame. We'll set that aside. We don't need that just this moment, because what we're going to do is we're actually going to solder the motor wires to each of the motor pads and the power leads to the power lead pads as well. And of course, we'll add a capacitor as well. Now, I'm not gonna make you sit here and watch every single motor wire, but I am gonna go ahead and start with one motor wire, show you how to solder it. If you've never soldered before, if you've never soldered on a drone before, you'll get a chance to see this. I am no expert by any stretch. You're not talking to the Mr. Steel of the world here, but I've gotten better as I've worked at it, and I feel like my soldering at this point is reliable enough that I can put together a safe and efficient drone build. So we will start with the motor wires. That's the easier of the two solders that we have to do here, and we'll move on to these power lead pads, which are a little bit more difficult. I'm gonna go ahead and tuck the two wires that I'm not using out of the way. I'm gonna go ahead and take my soldering iron, and I'm going to just heat the pad a bit. I'm actually gonna tuck that wire away a little bit. I'm gonna heat the pad a bit. You'll see there's some leftover solder residue from the tip of the iron is melting onto the pad. You don't need to use a lot of heat and time on these because they are tinier pads and they're also perforated, so that helps to disperse the heat across the pad. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna add just a little bit of solder to this now warm pad. Okay, and that's sort of what you want your solder joint to look like. You want there to be a nice silver ball that's shiny. That's a more ideal solder when you're working with motor wires especially. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna heat my solder or my motor wire. I do have some leftover solder from feeding that into the motor pad. You can coat the outside of your wire. You'll start to feel your wire get hot in your fingers. If you're holding it with your fingers, you'll feel that heat sort of go down the wire. And then once I've got the wire nice and hot, the pad should still be warm. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just going to incorporate that into the ball of solder that I've got. Now, I've got kind of bigger fingers, so if you're like me and it's hard to work on these smaller parts, get yourself some tweezers, because then what you can do is you can get really fine in there, and you can also avoid burning your fingers by holding the wire with them while you're heating it up. So all right, there we go. Now we've got one motor wire on there, and that's just how it'll lay, just like that. Once we're all said and done, I'll sort of tuck the wires so they run against the arm there. But we've got one of our motor wires on. I do see maybe a little bit of a problem here, and this is just as simple as reheating your solder and adjusting. I had a couple of these motor wires, the hairs just sticking out ever so slightly on that solder, and I don't want there to be a short where one of those motor wires would touch another motor wire and cause a problem in flight. So I'm just going to go ahead, reapply the solder. There we go. That's much cleaner. All right, so that looks good to go. We're going to go ahead and do the next two. Perfect. Okay, it may not be the prettiest looking solder job in the world, but it gets it done. It falls into the category I'd say is a decent solder job. So I'm happy with that. Like I said, we're not gonna sit through it. I'm not gonna solder all of the motors on for you. I'll get the rest of them soldered on. We'll come back and we'll do the battery leads together. This works just like a car battery. Positive is red, negative is black. So these are a little bit more difficult because the pads are a little bit larger. You've also got larger gauged wire that you're using here for your power leads. So you really want to make sure that these get very, very hot. I always pre-solder my power pads, so I'm going to go ahead and get these nice and hot, and then I'm going to actually add a ball of solder to them. I'm also going to coat the tip of these wires in solder. Some of them come pre-coated. In fact, I think these are pre-coated, but I'm going to add even more. Get these nice and hot. Once each pad and wire that corresponds to it is hot enough, I'm gonna go ahead and combine them. It is a difficult process, especially for those of us that aren't super experienced solderers like myself. Just be patient. Remember to let off the heat every once in a while. You don't want to have these pads pull up, because if you do, you've ruined your ESC. You're gonna have to buy a new one. So really important, you pay attention, make sure that you're being efficient with your heat, get it as hot as possible. Go ahead and try and put it on there. If it doesn't take the first time, back off, give it some time to cool off, and then come back to it and try again. For this, I'm also using a larger chisel tip. I'm gonna go ahead. I didn't talk about this earlier. This is flux. If you're not sure what flux is, essentially it is a solderer's best friend. Use your flux liberally. I use it to clean the tip of my soldering iron off, so I'll just go ahead and let you see. It's a little bit dirty there. Just go ahead, you can put it right in there. You're gonna get some smoking. Well, what this does is it actually liquefies, or helps to liquefy, solder that's stuck on the tip. And then once I've got the solder in a point where it's at its melting point, I'm gonna go ahead and just do a little bit more. I take my steel wool, which is off camera here. I just clean it off, and if you've got a sponge that you can get wet, you can also do it that way too. And voila, we've got a somewhat clean chisel tip here. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna get these pads nice and hot, and I just sort of brush and color in around the pad. That ensures that you get a nice even distribution of heat. If you hold it on one spot too long, you will get heat that will spread out, but it's not nearly as efficient, and you do run the risk more easily of damaging these pads. So as we get the pad hotter and hotter, you can go ahead, you can start to feed in your solder. I always feed the solder in so that it's touching both the pad and the tip. And you can see there, we're not nearly hot enough yet because the solder didn't take to the pad. So I'm gonna clean the tip of my soldering iron off, and I'm just gonna continue to heat it there. You'll see it's starting to get hotter now. It is grabbing some of that solder that I had melted. And that's what we want right there. We want the solder to sit on the pad just like so. Feed it in. Once you get a nice good coating of solder, you don't need a big ball like we did with the motor wires, just a nice coverage of solder on the pad there. You're pretty good to go. So we'll go ahead, we'll do that for the negative side as well. Perfect. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And you'll see for the most part, I've got pretty good coverage now. Actually the top of the lead popped out there, and I don't love that. I'd like to cover that and solder completely. And I don't want to just add solder to the top of it for the sake of it. So what I'm gonna do is just continue to work with the solder I've got. Get a nice coverage there. That looks pretty darn good. I got a pretty good grab there. I think that's a pretty decent solder. I don't love that the two pads, the corners of the pads are sticking out, but I don't know that it's something I really care too much about right now. Maybe something I come back and clean up later. I'm just happy that I've got a good grab on the negative, and we're good to go. Now it's time to come in and attach our capacitor. Again, really like this from GEPRC, the Taker F7 stack that includes this 4-in-1 ESC. They have dedicated holes for your capacitor. So actually I have this backwards. So soldering this in is gonna be super easy. If you don't have these on a particular ESC that you're using, if you wouldn't happen to be using the Taker F7, I don't know why, it's super convenient, reasonably priced. But if you are, you can solder these right into the pads, but just for the sake of this tutorial, we're gonna go ahead and solder them right into the holes. Now, we do know that purple is negative, so I can go ahead and trim these leads up. In fact, I'm going to, because I don't want there to be too much room for the capacitor. And the reason for that is if the leads are too long, you really run the risk of it snapping off and breaking. So instead, what I'll do is stop pushing that down. I'm gonna go ahead and just pop the legs in to the dedicated holes. And I'm gonna feed some solder down into those areas. It would be nicer to have a thinner tip for this, but I'm not gonna get too upset about it. Just figure it out, make it work. Okay, it looks like all of the soldering is done. So we're gonna go back to our wider view, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about incorporating the flight controller for the rest of this build out. We've got our heartbeat, our power source that goes to the drone. Now it's time to put the brain in. So you'll see here on the Taker F745 flight controller in this stack. You've got some ports on the top, super easy and convenient to use. No matter if you've been building FPVs for a really long time, you're used to soldering, or if you're brand new to the game, this will change everything when it comes to setting up your drone. Makes the Taker F745 stack super convenient to install into your drone. You're gonna get a bunch of cables, like this one for instance, with your F7 stack, your F745 stack, the Taker F745 from GEPRC. These plug into these ports. For instance, this one is looks like maybe an 8-pin connector here. This is gonna plug directly into your flight controller. And you can see here, you've got the labels on where things need to go. Typically, your positive and negative, your ground and your power, are colored black and red respectively. You can see on the board where they're posted. So you do have your ground and then your battery, right, left. So this is gonna plug in just like so. There you go. And then this will plug into your ESC like so. And you are set to go at that point. So now we can go ahead, we can flip the flight controller on to the drone just like that. And we, my friends, are nearly there. Very exciting stuff. Like I said, these JST connectors on your flight controller make it incredibly easy and convenient to set this build up. All intents and purposes, if we were to power this on, and you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and do that for you right now. I'm gonna plug our smoke stopper in. Super important, you get a smoke stopper. I've got a link down in the description below for this smoke stopper. Do not plug a battery directly into your drone build until you've properly vetted it with a smoke stopper. You can do it, you're risking smoking your motors, smoking your flight controller, smoking your ESC. This, how this works, will actually short out before your drone shorts out if there's any type of problem between your power and what's going on with the heart and the brain of your drone, or for that matter, any of the parts of your drone. So gonna plug our smoke stopper in. I'm gonna pull out a battery here. We're gonna plug this in. And then, moment of truth, you press the button. There we go. So everything's good to go. So like I said, we have a few things we need to incorporate in yet. We need to incorporate our RX and our camera system. So I've gone ahead and already mounted those particular pieces to the bottom of the frame here. You'll see this is our camera system. We're running a Nighthawk system by RunCam. It is a night vision camera, or it is a low light camera. So the idea behind this Cinewhoop is I can fly it indoors, outdoors, in any lighting condition and get the footage that I need, no matter how the visibility is to the human eye. This camera will be able to see for me. So interested to see how it goes. This will be the first time ever using this. I'm also using Crossfire for our RX. So there is an ELRS combo that you can buy from GEPRC. I'm not a huge fan of ELRS. We will be touching on that RX in a future video, but for the intent of getting this drone in the air, I'm using TBS Crossfire because Crossfire just works. So I've already got these set up, connected in. It's just a matter of connecting them to the flight controller and getting things powered on. So I'm not going to do that on camera for you. I'm only gonna do the mounting of the top plate to the bottom of the drone body for you so you can see how that all fits together. And then once I've got everything connected and I'm ready to mount that, we'll come back and we'll touch on how that goes. So as I was going through and getting ready to plug everything in so that we could get this thing started, I realized that I had to solder one more thing, my RX, my Crossfire receiver chip. What I'll have to do is I'll actually have to cut off one of the ends of this JST connector that was sent with the Taker F745 stack and just solder the wires into their corresponding slots. And that sort of pinged for me, oh, we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page as to where you solder what on this chip, because if you solder things backwards, it's not gonna work correctly. You're gonna have miscommunications between the RX, the controller, the FC. It's just not gonna go well. So I wanna walk you through that. You'll see here, this is on both sides of the board. We have some white print here above the JST connectors. Let me just get some light on the one I'm talking about, or we can just move down here. These aren't the ones that we're using, but just as an example, it tells you what wire goes where so that you're plugging the JST connector in correctly. You're not breaking any wire or any pins that are in the actual connectors themselves by jamming something in there when it doesn't fit right. And if you have to actually do what I'm doing, or you have to add your own JST connector onto a set of wires, you know how to wire your JST connection so that you don't have any sorts of issues with communication. And here we are, we have it assembled. Now is the moment of truth. This is when we figure out, is this thing gonna work? Or are we gonna have to go back to the drawing boards and take this thing all apart again? It's always the most nerve-wracking part of putting together any drone, but I have confidence in the GEPRC TAKER F745. I think it's gonna be great. Let's just go ahead, let's not waste any more time. Let's plug it in. Everything seems to be good. We got our chime to turn on. The first thing I wanna look at is, do we have video feed? I've gone in and I have updated the air unit that comes with the RunCam Night Eagle. This is the Night Eagle camera. So we should be set to go here. Just a matter of connecting. Would you look at that? After just a few taps of a button, we do indeed have video. Now that's an interesting feed, black and white. This is meant for nighttime and low light flying. So this is the whole purpose of this particular configuration with this HD camera. I want to be able to fly this indoors in low light situations and at nighttime. Looks like we're going to be able to do that. We'll do that in another video coming soon. But really, let's take a look at the other thing that's going to be most important. Does this connect to TBS Crossfire? So now that we have gone in, we've set our arm switches, we know what we need to do. It's the moment of truth. Throttle is all the way down. I do not recommend doing this with props on, but for dramatic effect, let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Would you look at that? Now we do have a little bit of a stutter. I'm not sure what that is, but we'll figure that out. Probably just a tuning issue, but we are up and running. So everything is set to go. I've got visual, it arms, I've got motors all running. A little bit wonky it sounds like, but we'll get that figured out. We're ready to fly this drone. We're ready to take it out, do initial testing, figure out what we need to change, what needs to happen to make this a finely tuned drone, and then we can go from there.
And that, my friends, is that. We have successfully integrated the GEPRC TAKER F745 stack into our drone build. Again, this is a brand new stack just dropping today from GEPRC. I've got links down below in the description of this video if you'd like to go check it out and potentially purchase it for yourself. When we go through our initial checklist for the integration of this stack into the drone, we've got power, no shorting, no issues that way. We've got RX, it's responsive and it arms. And we've got video as well. So we've got video feed to the goggles from the camera, which means everything's working the way that it needs to be working. There are only a few things left that we need to do before we deem this ready to use in any application, whether it's for fun, commercially, whatever the case may be. The next video, we're gonna take this out and do our initial test flights with this build using that GEPRC TAKER F745 stack. We're gonna take some notes during that flight if we're able to get it in the air. If not, we'll bring it back here, we'll figure out what we need to do, and then we'll take it back out into the field once we know that it can get airborne. And once it's airborne, we'll take notes on the performance of the drone overall. Those notes will tell us if there's anything that needs ratcheted down, more finely tuned, or if there's just any issues during flight that would be problematic long term. Once we have our notes, we'll move on to video number 3 in this series where we bring the drone back, we make those adjustments, whether it's hardware adjustments or it's adjustments in beta flight. And then once we've got everything just how we like it, we're gonna take it back out for video number 4, where we take a more polished look at this build using that GEPRC TAKER F745 stack. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you'll join me for the rest of this journey. Just as a reminder, if you would like to duplicate this build, now that the GEPRC TAKER F745 stack is available for purchase, go ahead and check out the links down below in the description of this video. I've got every single part that I used in this drone build included down below, so you can buy exactly the kit that I put together, one for one, just by following those links. I've marked all of the links that are affiliate links with the word affiliate in parentheses, just so you're aware. Full transparency, not every part in this drone I'll get a kickback on if you purchase them, but the ones that are marked, I do get a small commission every time a purchase is made using one of my links. And finally, I put this at the end of the video so that those of you that don't want to sit through my sappy sentimentalities, you can go ahead and just move on to the next video without losing any of the content that actually matters. I want to say thank you to GEPRC once again. I'm going to share with you a little bit of background information as to why this is such a historic video for the Drone Geek, for this channel, and for me. When I started my journey as a drone pilot, I flew basically out of the box RTF drones from big box stores, GPS drones, you know the sort. And once I started to dabble in FPV, one of the biggest hurdles that I knew I had to overcome was taking this very much idea-driven brain, but not technically driven brain, and rewiring it to understand the finer points of engineering something like this. Now, this is not the most advanced piece of engineering in the world. FPV drones in general aren't. There's only a few components to them, but I've never been super technical or detail-oriented in my life. I think that shows on some of the videos that I've done. So jumping into FPV was really scary for me, but I knew I wanted to do it because I wanted to fly something that was a little bit more exciting and gave me more flexibility in my arsenal of drones, if you will, as a drone pilot. That's when I found this little company called GEPRC. They made these really awesome pre-built drones, and my first FPV drone, proper FPV drone, traditional FPV drone, was a pre-built from GEPRC, the Synologue 35, and I loved that drone. I am so sad that it's not working anymore, but I understand that's also the nature of this side of the industry, is that sometimes things just go wrong, and maybe it's a little bit more cost effective to just start from scratch than it is to go through and diagnose an issue, figure out what it is, and then fix it. Regardless, that sadness is rooted in the happiness that the Synologue 35 brought me, because it really did introduce me to FPV and get me started on this part of my journey. If it weren't for that drone and for GEPRC, I certainly wouldn't have put this drone together. I'd still be flying GPS drones. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I never would have made the leap. So the fact that it sort of comes full circle, and GEPRC is also the first company to send me an unreleased product to review, it's sort of fitting. And again, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to the folks over at GEPRC for continuing to just bring me an immense amount of happiness and fulfillment in the world of FPV, and for partnering with this channel to do this video series. I am eternally grateful. Thank you so very much. Whew. Before I get all welled up, let's go ahead and wrap it up. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up icon down below. It helps me out a lot, helps get this video out into the algorithm to more viewers like yourself. If you love drone content shot by drones, about drones, and for drone pilots, well, my friend, this is the channel for you. Make sure you get subscribed if you haven't already by hitting that subscribe button, and while you're at it, hit the bell icon too. You'll get a notification every time I post a new video. Until next time, I'm Chris the Drone Geek. I'm out of here. See ya.
Yo, what you say?